When we think of slavery, we often picture men as the slave owners. But did you know that it's estimated that 40% of slave owners have been women? In this video, we'll take a look at the often neglected role of white women in slavery and their disturbing acts of physical and sexual abuse on slaves. But before we dive in, hit that subscribe button to stay on this channel for more content like this. The role of white female slave owners went beyond managing plantations. White slave-holding women felt entitled to exert a tremendous amount of control over their slaves. They played a very active role in furthering slavery for their own interests. In many southern states, slaves were essentially the only property that a woman could independently own from her husband. This led to white women's active participation in slavery during that time. Meet Delphine, a prominent socialite in 19th century New Orleans. She was known for her wealth and elegance, and her lavish parties were attended by high society. However, hidden behind this front was a disturbing and sinister secret. Rumors of mistreatment and cruelty towards her enslaved individuals had circulated in New Orleans. But it wasn't until a fateful day in 1834 that the truth came to light. A fire broke out at lalaurie residence, leading to the discovery of a hidden chamber in the attic. Inside, authorities found enslaved individuals in disturbing conditions. Many were malnourished, severely injured, and subjected to gruesome forms of torture. The discovery shocked the city, and the public's outrage was unprecedented. Delphine Lalaurie's reputation quickly transformed from that of a respected socialite to that of a monster. Delphine and her husband, Dr. Louis Lalaurie, fled the city amid the public outcry, and their whereabouts remained a mystery. Despite efforts to bring her to justice, Delphine Lalaurie never faced formal charges for her actions. The discovery of the Lalaurie mansion shed a light on the dark and hidden realities of certain white women's active involvement in the horrors of slavery. For other white women, the ability to own slaves was a crucial way for them to support themselves if their husband died or racked up too much debt. It also gave slave-owning women enough financial security to divorce their often abusive husbands, as they could rent out their slaves for income or use them to acquire a loan. Slaves were also an important indicator of status, and established the owner's social position and ladyhood, despite the cultural belief that black people were inferior. The black male body was the subject of fascination for many white women. Black men were often portrayed as hypersexualized and predatory figures in the eyes of white society. For white slave-owning women, these stereotypes provided opportunities for sexual exploration and exploitation. Cultural norms of that time dictated that white women should embody traits of moderation, modesty, and virtuous behavior. However, the sexualization of black men as uncontrollably lustful and dominant allowed some white women to feel entitled to exert full control and ownership over black bodies. The way some white women treated black male slaves was influenced by racism and gender dynamics. The power imbalance and belief in black inferiority allowed them to exploit the slaves sexually without facing consequences. This sense of entitlement over black bodies had severe consequences for enslaved black men, who were often subjected to sexual violence and exploitation by their white female owners. Such relationships were inherently non-consensual, as enslaved individuals had no agency or choice in the matter. They were forced to endure the sexual abuse and exploitation at the hands of their white owners. When white women engaged in relationships with black men, they could only rely on the mantle of white female purity to deflect blame from themselves and instead place it on the black men. From this developed the myth of the black rapist and the belief that black men inherently desire white women. As a result, violence against black men and the need to maintain slavery became intertwined with the supposed protection of white women's virtue. Slave owners and white society at large justified the brutal treatment of black men, using the myth of the black rapist as a reason for maintaining control and suppressing any form of resistance. This dangerous narrative caused a cycle of violence and oppression, as it not only reinforced the dehumanization of black men, but also served as a means of justifying slavery. By linking violence against black men to the protection of white women's virtues, slave owners wanted to maintain their power and uphold slavery. White women also played a role in separating black women from their own children. They frequently tore black women away from their babies so they could nurse the white mistress's baby instead. To this end, white women placed thousands of advertisements in newspapers looking for enslaved wet nurses to feed their own children. They created a huge market for enslaved black women who had recently given birth. But why did these white women want black women to nurse their children? White women often viewed motherhood and childcare as duties and burdensome, and linked it to a lower social status. According to historical records, a white female slave owner even expressed that taking care of her children made her feel like a slave to her children. Many slave-holding mothers or mistresses viewed their role in respect to their children as the protectors and moral guides. They took great pride in educating their children to be the next generation of plantation owners. However, they relied on enslaved women to do all the household work, as well as bathing, dressing, feeding, and providing general supervision of the white children. White women believed that black women were uncaring mothers for their own children, but could be refined and taught to be good caretakers for white children. Additionally, the belief that black women were unfit mothers caused many mistresses to take direct control over the slaves' children, with many going as far as to make the children call her mother. Mistresses were absolutely central to the systematic separation of enslaved children from their parents. Selling a child away was a useful and powerful threat to keep slaves submissive. As the children grew up, it was up to the mistress to decide which ones had the most potential for future service and which ones should be sold. Disturbingly, slave-owning women also tightly controlled what slaves were allowed to reproduce and be in relationships, often having one enslaved man have children with multiple enslaved women, denying black men the opportunity to be fathers and have families. The testimony of formerly enslaved mothers and children revealed the intense trauma created by the cruel and heartless separation of parents from their children and husbands from their wives. I hope you guys liked the video. A lot of time has gone into researching this topic, so we would appreciate it if you could show your support by hitting the subscribe button.